In the beginning of the summer, I started working on this game called Natural Selection. I've been working on and off whenever I have time, but I have been able to make some good progress, so I thought it'd be fun to make a little devlog and share some of the updates. So this is the most current version of the game. Starting off with probably the most important update, I've reworked the physics pretty much from scratch. If we take a look at the previous build and my previous video I posted about natural selection, the movement looks a lot more stiff, and this is because at the time I had used simple integer movement for dealing with velocity. The game just started off as a school project to show I knew how to use design patterns, so I really wasn't too concerned with how the game felt at the time, but I decided to continue with it, and I felt it necessary to make the game feel better to play. So I switched over to floating point movement and then also added an acceleration and gravity component to the movement of the duckling. As inspiration, I found myself opening up Super Mario a lot. I would just go in there and jump around and just get a sense of what a good platformer might feel like, and this helped me tweak the numbers to a point where I was relatively satisfied with the result. I definitely feel like the player character has a better sense of weight to it now. We are playing as a little duckling, so I did want to keep the game a little floaty, and to do that I just capped the downwards velocity a little bit. I also went ahead and reworked the horizontal movement, so rather than having a fixed movement speed, the duckling now accelerates forward and it's slowed down by friction. I wanted to give better control to the player, so I also added a run mechanic. It works just like in Mario, so if you hold down the run button, the duckling will run into a little running animation. It looks a little funny because art's definitely not my strong point, but I wanted to add some kind of running animation since I thought seeing the duck run would look a lot better than just having the screen scroll faster, which could be a little disorienting. Another important update was that I took the time to make the game frame rate independent. If you've never heard of the concept, basically you want the game to play the same no matter what kind of hardware is running it. So if someone's computer can't handle 60 frames per second, but they can do 30, the game should still be able to play the same. It'll look choppier, but the physics should still hold. This actually ended up being a really big challenge, since using a delta time multiplier messed with the physics of my game, and it caused the player to do things like plummet through the ground. The fix for this was to increase my tile size, so originally my tiles were 16 by 16, but I ended up changing them to 32 by 32, and this helped tremendously and I was able to get everything working. So here's the game running at both 60 FPS and 30 FPS. Even though the right side looks choppier, the duck is still moving at the same speed in both versions. I'm of the belief that the more options you provide a player, the better, so I went ahead and added control settings so that you can map the keys to however you want to play. Anytime you make a change, I created a .json file to store those changes, so that way the player's preferred controls will load up every time, and when you boot the game up, you won't have to readjust the controls. I think this topic would make an interesting tutorial since I haven't really seen it covered too much on YouTube, so we'll see. Another quick quality of life addition was a screen fade, so whenever the game starts or the player dies, the screen will slowly fade out instead of quickly cutting to the next scene. This is done by placing a transparent black surface over the game screen and then increasing its alpha value over a certain amount of time. It definitely helps to make the game look less amateur. I also implemented a HUD that displays how many lives the player has, along with all the fruit they've collected. Berries are a new addition, and they basically act like coins. I need to implement some kind of incentive so you'll go out of your way to pick them up. I didn't want to have to render the text for all the numbers every frame, since this would cause performance issues. So what I did is I pre-rendered graphics of all the numbers from 1 to 50, and then I just stored them in a list. So if a berry is collected or the player dies, rather than creating a new surface for the count, the image associated with that number is just swapped in. I also added these cloud platforms that disappear when you stand on them. Right now they just become transparent, but I think it'd be a good idea to go back and animate the clouds slowly disappearing. Speaking of animation, I've added some objects to the world just to make it feel a little more lively. So firstly I added these grass tiles that sway back and forth. I added a random element so they all sway a little differently and they don't look like they're swaying in unison. My next goal with these is to make them interactable, so maybe when the player runs through them, blades of grass will fall out or something like that. In the background I added a flock of birds. I reused the bird sprite from my last game Flightless and grayed them out to make it appear like a distant silhouette. Once the flock leaves the right side, they're pushed a good distance away from the screen until they finally reappear on the right side. Drawing and animating sprites like these is probably more time consuming than coding, but I think they really add charm to the game and they help bring it to life, so I think it's pretty important. Last thing of note is this little pause menu that I made. It's just a menu state that continually loops when the start button is pressed. This was pretty simple to make, the only tricky part was making sure the current controls were still kept track of. The reason I want to do that is because if you don't, you might get some strange behavior like the player continually moving or just stopping dead in the tracks after they unpause, so I had to make sure all the key presses were still being accounted for. That's pretty much everything for the current build of the game. The framework is pretty much done, so in the future I'll be focusing on more levels and features to make the gameplay more interesting. Moving platforms are definitely next on my to-do list. I just need to think of how I want to draw them. I've also been reaching to outside help for music, so I'm really excited about that looking forward. Thanks for sticking around. If you're curious about how I did any of this, feel free to ask questions in the comments. I'd be happy to reply to you and help out. And then the link to my GitHub is also in the description. The code for natural selection is all there, so you're welcome to take a look and see if it can help you, or you can even suggest things to me since I'm not perfect and I'm sure there's things I can improve on. I really want to finish this game and release it for free, so here's hoping that goes well. If you want to stay updated, make sure to subscribe, and with that said, stay safe and take care.